What are some of your most treasured memories of your mom? As I think about it, one of the benefits we have in our house, and we just finally got them fully fixed and functioning once again, is we have a photo frame wall. And Heather frequently will update those photos, and then I have to actually then move SD cards back and forth, trying to put them in randomized order so it's not just weird watching the same stuff over and over. But we often will sit there, and every time we do it, anytime then Heather and I will be sitting on the couch and watching TV, I am guaranteed she will actually not be watching TV. She will in fact be watching the photo frame wall. So I know for myself, as I think back to a lot of the memories, especially of my wife and our kids as they were younger and smaller, probably for me, some of the greatest memories is when I was actually taller than all three of my boys. I just think that's a wonderful thing. So other memories that you have of moms? Cooking. Nice. My mom was a terrible cook, so that's fantastic. That she can make a great meatloaf. That was about it. So, but yeah, Carolyn is a good cook. Oh, that's fantastic. Good. Yes. She's loving? Okay. Well, that's good. That's a good answer. I like that answer. Yay. Yes. Her Sunday roasts? Oh, not like roast, like you're going to insult people for 2 hours, especially if you're a former quarterback of the New England Patriots, right? Yeah, okay. So not that type of roast, but like a pot roast. The Sunday roast, okay, that's good. Though I think we should bring back some roasts, though I feel roasted every time I give bad jokes and Diane yells at me. So every Sunday I try to get something in. Yes? Your mom would always wake up with you and have coffee. Right. That is why Heather's growth is so stunted, is she drank coffee from her height. She would have been 6'12" if, not drinking coffee at the beginning. Yeah, I've been like Josh. Yes, yes. You would spray pepper, you put it in there, and you would blow it. Laughing and that is an interesting, that's awesome. I love it. I think that's fantastic. Next year we will have some pepper shakers out for Mother's Day. I think that would be, we should bring that thing back. Yeah, Pepper Wars. I love it. Yes, Heather. Yeah, going garage sailing, what a wonderful thing. And then also all the stuff you did with USO as well. Yeah, that the Saturday morning routines that were so great. And garage sailing is always fun because you find out all the value of stuff that truly is junk, but it really is valuable to certain people. That's very cool. Yeah. Any other memories? Joshua, tall one. Yes. Yeah. So Joshua used to dictate his stories to Mom. And I do remember the one that was kind of the funniest when he talked about, I think he was like 8 years old, and he talked about someone approaching the sarcophagus. And Heather's like, wait, how do I spell sarcophagus? And did you actually spell it, or he did? He actually spelled it, yeah, because that's Joshua. Yeah, that's a great thing. Joshua used to dictate stories to Mom, and she used to write it down. Any others? Mom's going all out for Christmas. Nice. Yeah. Oh, that is amazing. That is me. Yes. Traveling with Mom. Nice. Yes. I love traveling with moms. They're awesome. The reason why I bring this up is obviously it's Mother's Day and we want to celebrate that. But I also think it's going to be super helpful as we go through Deuteronomy chapter 8. Because there's going to be a little bit of reminiscing, but it's not a reminiscing for the sake of reminiscing. It is looking to the past to help us inform our future. And I think we do that also with moms too, right? When Mom does stuff we like in the past, we are more apt to do that in the future as well. And this is what God is going to be doing with the Israelite nation. Remember, they're on the border of the promised land. Moses is about to die. he is going to be taken up into heaven with God, and the people are going to be led through the Jordan River by a guy named Joshua, who now will become the leader. And Moses is giving his final words of instruction. And what he's really hoping that they learn is what it means to be in the covenant, to be covenantal people, people who have a relationship with God, and learning how should I live my life out as we continue forward. And one of the things that you're going to see, and I don't know if you have headings on your Bible, my Bible does have a heading at chapter 8. It says, do not forget the Lord. Do not forget God. All through this, God is going to be talking about what does it mean to not forget. And it was interesting as I kept thinking about it, why does God keep saying things like, don't forget? Why is he always mentioning this? Well, it's pretty simple. We are forgetful people. We forget the past. And because we forget the past, we often live in a chaotic present and a very unsure and uncertain future. So if we get the chance to remember back, then the forgetfulness will not be quite as vigorous. And you're going to see as we go through this, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to lead to forgetfulness. And a lot of it is because of the present that we live in. There are things like our present victories or our present struggles or our present circumstances. All of these things tend to cause us to become very myopic, as if we have blinders on and we cannot remember things. Now, I admit that if we were going to talk about gender, this is truly and utterly a problem, mainly with males, right? Guys, give us one task and that's it. Women, moms and women amaze me because you can be like doing 12 different tasks at once. And so you can accomplish this idea of remembering much better. And I don't know why. I think God has just given you this incredible ability to remember things. It frequently happens in my house. Honey, where are my shoes? And her answer is always the same. I don't know, where'd you leave them? And I'm like, so I think even the last time I was like, hey, honey, where's my shoes? And I went on and said, oh, where'd you leave them? I'm like, oh, that's really funny, honey. I'm not too sure. If I knew where I left them, then I wouldn't be asking you, do you happen to know? Oh, well, have you looked in the closet? Yes, I've looked in the closet. Well, have you looked in the shoe box? Yes, I've looked in the shoe. Well, and then I stopped because that lets her know, here's all the places I've looked. And then this literally happened, was it yesterday, I think it was? She was like, did you look under that massive pile of clothes in the corner that's getting bigger and bigger? Did you look under there? I'm like, you know what? No, I didn't. And I looked under there and there were my shoes. It was amazing. Women can remember things. And so, though I think this is going to be probably more geared towards a guy mind, I think women also, the idea of remembering God and making sure that the present, what's happening in your life now, doesn't cloud your memory of the past, and instead help you go back, not so that you get stuck in the past, not so that you live in the past, but so that you're informed by it and be able to live better in the future. All right, so here we go. Chapter 8. This is where I think we're going to start off with the concept that present circumstances tend to cloud out past victories. Here's what he says. Be careful to follow every command I am giving you today so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land that the Lord promised on oath to your forefathers. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. Of course, it's an interesting thing. Did God test the Israelite nation so that he could figure out what was in their heart? No, he didn't test it because he didn't know what was in our heart. He tested us because We don't know what's in our heart. We don't know what we're capable of and how we often forget and how often we're going to keep his commands. So when God puts us through trials and tests, it's not for his benefit. He's not surprised. Instead, it's for us to learn more about ourselves. So he says, remember all of the stuff in the past, especially in this following and this wandering through the wilderness. Verse 3, he humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your forefathers had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Again, this probably sounds familiar. There was another time when another person was also in the wilderness, and he also had not eaten for 40 days, and he was then tempted by Satan, and the first temptation that's there is turn these rocks into bread. And it's a reminder, what he's trying to say is the most important thing for us is our relationship with God and not forgetting who God is. There are times we're going to go through some struggles. There's times when we're not going to be able to eat or drink. There's going to be times that we're going to have scarcity in our life. But scarcity that brings us closer to God is worth going through. Now, if the scarcity all of a sudden starts causing you to be embittered and cause you to be angry at who God is, now that could be a different problem. But when scarcity then causes you to say, Lord, I'm in trouble. I need some help. Can you assist? And that brings us to him. That type of scarcity is good. I know we often don't talk about the blessings of bad things, but this is one of them, that we end up depending upon God and his word, not upon our own ability to manufacture or acquire earthly pleasures, like bread, wine, things like that. So he's trying to remind them every day for 40 years they had manna. Now again, I don't know about you. I think I'd get bored. Wouldn't you? 40 years, the same food. Oh, right, it depends upon what manna tastes like. And I think I've said it before. What do I think manna tastes like? Frosted Flakes. Yeah, exactly. When you read the description, it's like Frosted Flakes. It seems like these little flakes on the ground, and they're a little sweet, got a little coriander flavor to it. Yeah, little Frosted Flakes, right? And I don't know, like, I think see, I can't even look at her because she's going to boo me right away. So, I'm sure they started like getting like clever with their food, right? What do you do with manna? Like, do you just eat it like this? Wait,
you bake banana bread. That's a Keith Green lyric.
That's a bake banana bread? Banana bread. I had not heard that one, so I'm going to have to tuck that. That's not yours? Okay, yeah. I think you do stuff like just make a little bit of manicotti. Manicotti. That one's good? Was that? Okay, well, thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. Yeah, you can leave now. The idea of eating something over and over and over again, helping the Israelite nation realize that there's nothing else to get, causes them to have dependence upon God. And what he's saying is your present circumstances, as you look forward into this promised land, you're about to experience some difficulties, right? We've already talked about it last week. They're going to be encountering nations that are much stronger, much better equipped than themselves, and they are not going to be able to fight well against them. But God keeps saying, don't let that cloud your judgment. Don't let the present circumstances or a fear of something cause you to forget. What did they forget? Throughout those years, God provided for them. Throughout those years, God handed over kings like Og and Sihon to gods or kings much more strong, much more powerful than them. God said, go to the past, look what he's done, and be reminded that I will always be with you. I think many of you know, I've shared before of my journey in finances. I vividly remember my time at the seminary. And at the seminary, Heather was a youth intern, which means she was making nothing. And I was a student, which means I was making negative dollars because I was actually spending money to do stuff. And so we ended up eating a lot of Papa John's pizzas because they were $5 carry-out specials. And I remember that we had struggles so often with money, but we never went without. And now here we are today. And if I ever look and start worrying about the future, I have God's word rattling around. Don't forget. He saw you through all of that, through all that scarcity. He will continue to be with you. So I don't know if you have lived on top ramen or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or peanut butter sandwiches, pasta, bread, just peanut butter straight out of the spoon, right? Like that's all I got. God has seen you through a lot. And if you are currently in that, God will see you through that so you do not have to worry about that future. Don't forget what God has already done. And also, I think it's really interesting, though it doesn't talk about it here, they did something special with a jar of manna. Bonus points if you can tell me what they did with a jar of manna. They put it in the Ark of the Covenant. So that's why when Indiana Jones opened it, he reached in, grabbed a snack first, ooh, this is really good. It's in the. Why is it in the Ark of the Covenant? To remind them. Also there was the Ten Commandments. I think it's really great that man does not live by bread alone, the manna, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God, the Ten Commandments. I think it's fascinating how that all ties in. So if you end up in a position where you are worried about your current situation and what's ahead of you, go back. Don't forget. Don't let the current circumstances cloud your vision. All right, so we keep going. Verse 4, your clothes did not wear out and your feet did not swell during those 40 years. How that happened, that's amazing. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. And then he reminds them that though they had scarcity in the past, in the future, God has something else. And what's really interesting is that normally God has a very specific description of the promised land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. That's always the description. What's interesting is the description changes right here. And look at what it says. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and revering him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and pools of water, with springs flowing in the valleys and hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. Now, I do have to chuckle because I always understand a little bit more about when people write things. So I was reading the NIV application commentary and it was going through these things, and it talks about how wheat and barley, what do you use to make out of wheat and barley? What do you use that for? To make? Beer. That's exactly what the NIV commentaries, I was shocked. He's like, well, this clearly is so that they can make beer. And I'm like, really? I did not read that in the text, but I guess it's true that, yeah. I guess, what was that, Josh? Yeah, I mean, yeah, beer is just liquid bread. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. That's why you just need to pour some butter in the beer and it tastes a little bit better. Don't do that. Yeah, Rich, what? Yeah, and then the vines, and immediately the NIV application commentary is, well, yeah, sure. It's to make grapes and raisins, but also wine. Yes, so, yeah. I just thought I had to write that in. I actually wrote that NIV application commentary, beer and bread. And I think it put it in that order too. Again, I think this is geared toward the guys here, right? We need to have our beer. Verse 10. Now we're going to be concerned about a new problem. Another thing that causes us to forget God's goodness is sometimes our present blessings cloud out our remembrance of who God is. I know that there have been times in my life when I have ended up with a lot of good things. And sometimes when I've ended up with those good things, I ended up forgetting some of the past and the provision, and I start also thinking about how good and strong I am and my ability to do things. I think sometimes with those present blessings, when things are going good, we have a tendency to not focus on God. Does that happen to you? I've known people who have had struggles with finances, and then God brings them blessings, and so they have those blessings, and quickly they forget who God is, and they quickly pull away from him, and they are no longer close to him. I've seen people who have been embroiled in marriage conflict, and so they search and they seek and they ask God and they beg him for help and they seek those things, and then once there is just a small amount of relief, immediately they turn back and forget everything that they'd gone through, and the present blessings cause them to forget about God. Are you going through a time in your life right now that things are so good that you don't really think about God much? I admit this is, I think, something that I struggle with quite a bit. I can easily get distracted with the good stuff around and think to myself, who brought this into my life? And I quickly say, it's me. Now check what God says. Verse 10. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and your gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. This is one of those subtle things that happens that I think especially Christians slip into way too easily. When things are going well, when there's no fights in the family, when the money seems to be doing okay, when my cars are operating well, when I don't have a leak in my roof, when all, yeah, it's personal, man. When you finally have destroyed 34 rats in your house, I admit, once all that is done, I have a tendency to just say, oh, I'm done. And I quickly forget what God has given to me. I quickly forget all of the pain and the misery. As many of you know, yes, we have had problems in our house. We have had rats that chewed a hot water line in our ceiling, and it caused it to collapse, and we've had to redo a ton of stuff. And we are getting near the end of the project. And you know what I forget? I forget how God got me through all of that garbage. You know what I do remember? I remember all the time I spent. I remember all the work that I put into it. I remember all the work that my wife and my father-in-law put into it. And I often forget the most important person, God. Sometimes our present blessings cause us to forget God. If you are someone who tends to have great things happen and you don't return, you might find yourself in a constant and perpetual state of lacking and difficulty, because that sometimes is our only way that we remember God. It brings us to that story that everyone knows we talk about every Thanksgiving, right? 10 guys who suffered from a horrible, life-changing, and family-destroying disease called leprosy. They hadn't been with their families. They hadn't been to church. They had been outcast, pushed to the edge and the fringe of society. Jesus comes along, heals the 10 lepers, and he doesn't do it right. I'm surprised, but of course it's because I'm not God. Why doesn't he just heal them right then and there? Instead, what does he do? He says, go show yourselves to the priests. And they're still all leprous and gross. But they all take the step of faith and start heading towards the church. And they arrive at the church. And once they get there, somewhere along the way, they're healed. And what happens? One person returns to God. Isn't that interesting? All of them were healed. They all had received the exact same blessings, but that special blessing they had received didn't drive them back to God, saying, thank you for everything that you've done. I think that's why we often end up in difficult situations. I'm thankful for times like Mother's Day. I'm thankful for things like graduations, because we often then realize, wow, how did we get here? My present blessing didn't come through just nothing. It came through a lot of challenges. And people saw me through that. But most importantly, God saw us through. So if we are someone who forgets God whenever we get even the slightest blessings, be careful. He's saying this. You're going to end up with houses and wells and gold and silver, but whatever you do, don't forget God. Verse 15. He led you through vast and dreadful desert, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the desert, something your fathers had never known, to humble you and to test you so that in the end it might go well with you. And then here's the next one. Sometimes our present strength and our present abilities cause us to forget God. You may say, verse 17, of yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your forefathers, as it is today. I was just reminded of that this week. I was having a conversation with someone, and I was talking about how grateful and thankful I am that my kids all love to go to church, that my kids all have a faith in Jesus. And as I was thinking about it, I'm like, how did that happen? I'm like, well, I do know that I'm never against bribery. All three of our children learned early on that just prior to church, we always go to one special place. And if you ever forget, Mark Thomas is always sitting in the back sucking on something. It's a Starbucks. So our kids, from a super early age, they all knew going to church also meant getting Starbucks. And then I also thought about, wow, here's all these things that we had them do. From an early age, Jacob was very much involved in setting up and tearing down. He did all of the PowerPoint from the past. He did so much stuff. And then he left for college and seminary. And in comes Joshua, and he starts doing stuff, even to the point now where he can just and I'm thinking to myself, wow, we did a great job. This is good. And then I forget something. Who is the one who has actually given them faith? Who is the one who actually has given us breath in our lungs to tell our kids about Jesus? Who is the one that has given us a place so that we can actually worship? Who is the one that is ultimately responsible for this? God. Wow. So yeah, I get very annoyed at God when I'm getting ready to preach and he's reminding me that the first thing is for me to learn. And I'll tell you this, my kids are who they are. I think I've had an influence on them. I think their mom has had an influence on them. I think all of you have had an influence on them. But the most important influence is God himself. And I am thankful. And I think that's for all of us. I think in terms of our strength, we might say we are really good at fixing a broken pipe, teaching elementary students, installing keypads for a security system at church. We all have these gifts and abilities, and we often forget who gave us the abilities in the first place. Yes, we might have grown in them. Yes, we might have gone and studied for them. Yes, we might have continued to practice those crafts over and over and over again, and we've become very skilled at them. But never forget who gave it to you in the first place, and that was God. The breath in my lungs, the strength in my feet, my ability to memorize, my lack of fear in front of people has given me skills and abilities to be a pastor. But I never, ever should forget that all of those skills and abilities came from God first. This is seen, I feel, most clearly in the story of David versus Goliath. David and Goliath, we know the story pretty well, I think, right? Little kid, big giant. One of the things that we forget about David is who he was and what he was able to do. David's profession was he was a shepherd. And he even talks about that when he sees this giant 9-foot tall dude that's got major armor and he's got massive spears. And David is... Everyone thinks David is small. I'll tell you this, David is shorter than Saul. Saul was a full head foot taller than everyone else. That's what we know. And David, we think he's like this little tiny asparagus. He's not. He even talks about it when this giant is defying him, and he says, "Let me take a crack at him." He says, and they're like, "You can't do it. You're just a little kid." Now, maybe his age was young. I'll give you that. But David says, "Are you kidding me? Do you want to know what I do as a shepherd?" He says, when a lion or a tiger or a bear, no, tigers wasn't a part of it. It was just lion and bear, but I thought that would be good to put in there. When a lion and a bear comes to grab one of my sheep and take it off, do you know what I do? Because you know what I would do if a lion or a bear came to grab a sheep? I'd run. I'd be like, "Take more if you want." Like, hey, the whole flock is here. I'd be a terrible shepherd. Yeah, forget that. I ain't saving my, yeah, forget it. He says he would go and grab the lion or the bear with his bare hands and rip them in half. Oh my. Is David buff? Is David scrappy? David is like the ultimate fighting champion, man. He could just rip things. So that's the reason why I think it interesting that when it comes time for David to fight, what do you think David wants to do? I know what David wants to do. He wants to rush right at Goliath, and I think he's going to slide right under his legs, and then he's going to come up off the back, and he's going to grab him. He's going to snap his neck, grab his face, and rip it open. I think that'd be fascinating to watch, right? That's what David did. And what does God tell David to do? Pick up some stones and a slingshot. David's like, "Wait, what? My gifts, my abilities." And God's reminding him, you're not going to win this always with your gifts and abilities. Don't forget who gave you those gifts and abilities in the first place. You're going to do it my way. And David lays down his strength and picks up a sling and throws a rock. I think David at least felt good, once the rock hit and the giant went down. He's like, "Can I at least chop off the guy's head?" And God says, "Yes, you may chop off his head." Don't forget, your natural gifts and abilities are God-given. Your talent for music, it's God-given. Your ability to bring truth to little kids, God-given. Your ability to be brave in challenging situations, like our men and women in fire and police, that's God-given. If you are someone who has a love for country and serves your country, as those who do in the armed forces, God-given. All of those gifts and abilities are God-given. Don't ever forget it. Sometimes our own present abilities can cloud our vision, but don't ever forget. And he finally finishes up. Because here's the result of if we forget. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that... Are you watching someone else's sermon? Oh, he's reading scripture to you. I thought maybe you were watching like, man, this sermon is boring, man. I'll watch some other dude. Hey, great sermon. Yeah, I'm getting more out of this. No, that's okay, yeah. It was just reading scripture to you. Yeah, don't hit that button again. Everyone else is like, wait, what button is it? I need to make sure I don't hit it. I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Yeah. Like the nations, the Lord, just verse 20, like the nations, the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God. I'm keenly aware, and I am so grateful that God is always telling us, don't forget. Don't forget what God has given you. Don't forget what God has done for you in the past. Don't forget how God has endowed you with wonderful things. And don't ever forget this. God will never forget you, ever. He always has you in his thoughts. He never goes a minute without thinking about you. And he will never forget his promise of love and a promise of a covenant where he sacrificed his son on our behalf. A covenant that said, you are so valuable and precious to me, I'm willing to even sacrifice my own kid because I want to be with you. A God who will never forget all that Jesus has done for you. And because of that, and the faith that he has given for you, you will never be destroyed. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are grateful.